What can I say about today's guest that hasn't already been said? Dr. Stewart Hilliard is renowned in the dog training space. He's done a bunch of work with the US military and defense programs, training protection dogs to a really high standard. And at the same time, he understands the science behind dog training. And as you're listening to this episode, I want you to think for yourself. Stress for a dog. When is it healthy? When is it unhealthy? I'll give you a hint. We talk about this concept at length. Specifically, can a dog predict and control the stress in its life? Enjoy. Today's episode is going to have a bunch of nuggets that you can implement if you're a protection dog trainer, a sport dog trainer, or a pet dog trainer. Thank you for tuning in. Doggie Stoic community. This is one of those episodes if you're driving, if you're walking your dog, if you're running, whatever you're doing. If you don't have the next 60 to 90 minutes to kind of pay full attention, pause it, hit it, add it to that watch later, the save later thing on Spotify or YouTube and come back to it. Because I think going into this episode, I'm wearing my student hat. I want to learn. It's a privilege to have this guest on. So just really briefly, because I'm going to kick it off and then turn it over to Dr. Stewart Hilliard. This is a gentleman who's shaped modern dog training. This is a gentleman.
You did not warn me that you were going to do this.
These are my words. These are my words. You could say, I didn't do anything. I didn't do any of those things. How about this? Is it true that you have decades of experience successfully training dogs for pet dogs and for the military?
More or less successfully. Awesome.
Do you love
a few of them successfully? Let's put it that way.
A few. Okay. Yeah. Do you intertwine the training, the watching how the dogs look and behave with science and studies?
Yeah. I can't help it. After one way I describe myself is as a glorified dog trainer. And okay. I'm usually saying that in front of scientists and maybe kind of operational folks, just trying to say that I have kind of a dog trainer's outlook and mentality. And it doesn't usually fall upon me to point out to dog trainers that the same thing works in reverse, right? Like I cannot, what keeps me going in dogs after many years is just fundamental intellectual interest in them, their behavior, the science that helps us understand their behavior, the science that helps us understand the way that we work with and sculpt their behavior to achieve training goals. So yeah, I mean, those two sides of my kind of inclinations and my training are inseparable, right? So it goes without saying, but it's worth saying perhaps to dog trainers that I can't help but think about science when I watch dog trainers, when I watch dogs behave, and especially when I watch good dog trainers work with dog behavior. That makes all kinds of lights go off in my head about why it works, why it doesn't work, how it could work better, the choices, the technical choices that are made, the trade-offs between technical advantages, technical disadvantages. And then when I'm talking to people who are more scientific, I kind of have to, sometimes it helps to remind them that I'm a practitioner as well as a scientist, right? I'm one of the few people with a foot in both worlds.
I can't believe this is free. So Training Without Conflict, Ivan put on a panel. It was Michael Ellis, Dr. Stewart Hilliard, Ivan, and then Stephanie Cody. So it's a free episode, and I highly recommend you guys watch it. If you just search those names on YouTube, you'll find it's 2.5 hours. It's incredible. And what I took away quite a few things, but one of the things I took away is what even is science? That's why I wanted to start with you, is you define terms incredibly, incredibly well. And I remember during COVID, we heard that word science. If you go to Google Analytics, it probably spiked during COVID. What even is science? When we talk about like science of aversive control or science of positive reinforcement works better than punishment, what do people mean by that?
That's a huge question. If I'd known you were going to ask me that question, I would have studied up on it. Science is a what? 500-year-old, 400-year-old, if we're talking about a modern scientific viewpoint, a 400 or 500-year-old viewpoint on how to accumulate knowledge about the world that we live in. And the two foundations of science are, as far as I can say, are, first of all, empirical observation. So watching what happens in the world around us, organizing what happens in the world around us in terms of theories. What theories are is simplified representations of events, and then testing those theories. And the fundamental backbone of science is that you cannot prove anything is true. It's logically impossible to prove that an empirical phenomenon is true. But what you can do is you can, through well-constructed theorizing and then testing of those theories with empirical experiments and observations, you can fail again and again and again to falsify something. And the theories that hold the most sway in our world, for instance, the theory of relativity, the theory of evolution, et cetera, they are theories. They could be proved, in principle, they could be proved wrong tomorrow. But on many hundreds and thousands of occasions, empirical scientists have performed experiments, made observations that failed to disconfirm important predictions of the theory of evolution, the theory of relativity, the theory of, et cetera.
Gravity, right?
Gravity, yeah. Although there's a weird thing going on there, because Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics don't speak that well to each other, right? So anyway, that's a different topic. But that's what I think science is. And recently, there's a pundit who appears quite commonly on Facebook. The person is in my feed. They appear to be from what I would call the force-free community. And lately, one of the statements on their feed was that the science hasn't changed in 100 years, the science of learning and behavior. And the guy is so wrong. It's changed a bunch of times since then, right? Because as our knowledge today will be modified by the things that we find out tomorrow and the day after and the day after, right? But that's another fundamental premise in science, is that what you think is the case today is always potentially subject to lack of confirmation or lack of support by an empirical observation, which leads to further theorizing, which leads to further experimentation, and carries us incrementally closer and closer to the truth. And some theories are so well supported that they are virtually facts, right? But in principle, in the philosophy of science, they are not facts, because you cannot prove something is true. Logically, all you can do is fail to disconfirm it.
You can't prove something is true. Logically, you could just fail to disconfirm it. And
it takes one observation to fail to support a theory.
And do you feel, so like one of the things I loved on the panel, right, was you guys went kind of round robin, and the question was about like, what is poor welfare for a dog, right? Because force-free or positive only, they'll argue like, the e-collar or a punishment or aversive control, kind of however you frame those words, whatever they mean to you as the listener, will say, well, you put the dog in poor welfare, they'll have ulcers, for example, they'll be shut down, they'll be panting, they'll be, ears, they'll point, they'll do like these screenshots and say this or this or this.
Yeah.
And I thought your definition was, it was amazing, right? Like you went like, what is poor welfare, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is it an adverse emotional response? Well, no. And then you made this point. I thought this was amazing. It's the absence of predictability and control, because every organism experiences stress in our daily lives. It's part of normal adaptation and coping. And our duty is to help dogs successfully cope and control outcomes that bring them stress or a perception of stress. Now, did I summarize that properly? Anything you'd like to add, kind of elaborate on?
Yeah, we can. That's a pretty fair appreciation of my position. There are a lot of authorities in the dog training world who will contend to you that essentially poor welfare can be demonstrated by a few moments of an animal's life. And if the animal shows negatively valenced affect, that's a very carefully chosen phrase from the literature, basically saying, hey, I think at that moment in time, judging from the animal's body language, etc., I think the animal might be feeling an emotion which is unpleasant, right? Negatively valenced affect, right? There are very many statements floating around the internet, and then also quite a few conclusions in scientific papers, basically saying that a few moments in a dog's life where the dog shows negatively valenced affect is demonstration that that dog's welfare is compromised and in danger. And the conclusion that you have to draw from that is that any stress that an animal goes through that makes it show even a few moments of negatively valenced affect is a threat to welfare, right? And from that, you have to draw the conclusion that if you really care about your dog, what you have to do is protect the animal from all stress. Like nothing bad, this is your duty to your dog. Nothing bad can ever happen to your dog that you can possibly prevent, because even a few moments of negatively valenced affect represents a compromise to that animal's welfare. And if you could have prevented it in any way, you are remiss in your duties to the animal. My perspective on it is that, first of all, and then also the idea here is, if you want to summarize, good welfare is the absence of stress, right? So this whole argument is saying that good welfare is the absence of stress. Ergo, your duty to your dog, if you care about the dog, is to prevent stress at all costs. Never let the animal experience any stress. I don't subscribe to that point of view. There is a very large literature, both in animal welfare journals and most especially in comparative psychology, where empirical researchers, where scientists carried out many experiments on animals that involve stressing the animals, sometimes to a small degree and sometimes to a very great degree, often using very uncomfortable stimuli. It is, for instance, from this literature that the learned helplessness phenomenon and the theories around it, the conversations around it come from. So the people who did the heavy lifting about studying animals under stress are a community of scientists I call comparative psychologists. Many welfare scientists draw many of their conclusions from this. And if you go to the animal welfare, the more scientific animal welfare articles, they do not, in general, define welfare as the absence of stress. They define welfare as a state in which the animal is experiencing non-traumatic degrees of stress, and then like daily normal degrees of stress, like organisms face as they go through life, and then also the presence of the ability to predict important things that are going to happen, not just stressors, but also rewards, and then also, very importantly, to control things that are going to happen, most especially stressors. So I can point to many articles in the animal welfare journals that define animal welfare this way, that define good welfare this way, as the presence of prediction and control, not as the absence of stress. One of the things that's going on is that quite a few of the articles that are cited by the force-free community to uphold the idea that our duty to our dogs is not to do anything ever that allows them to feel, negatively valenced affect. Many of these articles don't define welfare this way. They define welfare as the absence of stress. They do not define welfare as the presence of predictability and control.
So I have to ask, well, there's just like the very first like basic question I would say is, is it as simple as measuring cortisol levels in the dog's system?
No, it's not. And this is one of the things.
How would they know the degree of stress that an organism faces? I guess is the question.
Well, corticosteroid measurements are often taken, and they're often misinterpreted. What you have to understand is that corticosteroid responses. So corticosteroids are stress hormones that are secreted in an interaction, a very intimate interaction between the brain and the endocrine system, and they essentially serve to help animals activate when they're going to behave in very vital ways. They also are products of stress responses. They do lots and lots of things, but it is not the case that a spike in corticosteroids in the blood is solid evidence that the animal is stressed. One of my favorite results is from a Koolhaas. Koolhaas is a stress researcher, I believe, of Dutch origins, who is fond of citing a particular experimental result, which was that male rats that were studied while and after mating with female rats showed higher corticosteroid spikes than rats that got shocked with electric shock, right?
And I would love for you guys listening, put in the comments as to why that's happened. I mean, only from personal experience, though.
So you either have to conclude that sex is super stressful and we should never, ever do it, right? Or allow our dogs to do it. Or you have to conclude that corticosteroid measurements are difficult to interpret, right? And very many of the articles in the dog science literature rely to some extent on corticosteroid measurements to advance the argument that the dogs in the study were experiencing stress, that their welfare was in danger, right? And you need more than that. And there is something promising. There is a good researcher whose name is, what I mean by good researcher is she does what I think are some of the highest, I'm sorry, I was speaking too fast, too much caffeine. She does some of the highest quality research in the dog welfare and training realm. And what she is experimenting with is a kind of measurement called a judgment bias, which leads you to an idea about how pessimistic or gloomy an animal might be, right? But, and this may eventually be a good way of answering the question, when I look at this animal in a broad way across the sweep of the dog's life, the dog's daily experience, not for a few moments, is this animal experiencing negatively valenced affect in a long term, in a pervasive way? But I don't think that science is there yet. There are complex debates about judgment bias numbers, methods, what they mean, etc. So anyway, Vera de Castro is doing work like that in dogs, and we'll see if it really adds something to the argument. But coming back, what I'm saying is, you started with, hey, when people say dogs, their welfare is harmed, upon what data do they rely? What evidence do they rely to make that statement and support it? Sometimes on really weak evidence.
Right. And I mean, we've seen this. I mean, we could even like look at it in sports, right? We saw the movie called Moneyball, right?
Uh-huh. That's a great movie, incidentally.
It's a great movie. And I think as human beings, we're always trying to like answer like how the world works and how within the world, like how our world works. So he was trying to figure out, are there these numbers? Like, I think on base percentage was a big one that he was looking at, if I remember correctly. Are these numbers that will give us more clarity into deciding, which players should be on our roster, right? But then I think players that, played also would say the eye test matters, right? And like, how can you define the eye test? But I imagine that's what you opened up this conversation with. Not only am I a scientist, I am also a practitioner, right? Like I actually get to see different dogs at different stages of their lives who've had different backgrounds to before they got there. And that's a big deal.
And the different stages part is an important kind of lead back into the thing that we were talking about, because so one thing I introduced is the idea that we shouldn't define welfare in terms of the absence of stress. We should define it in terms of the presence of predictability and control. Another thing that I say is that we should define welfare in an inclusive way, taking the entire sweep of the dog's life into account, right? So imagine a situation in which we see a dog trained with an electric collar, and the dog shows, as a result of the electric collar work, the dog shows negatively valenced affect. Let's say wouldn't be unexpected, wouldn't be an unusual thing to see happen. Now, fast forward, let's go 6 or 8 weeks forward. Let's say there's a pet dog that some good dog trainer has intervened with and done a bunch of high quality work with. So the dog showed some moments or truncated periods during which the dog looked stressed or unhappy or whatever you want to call it during training. And then 8 or 12 weeks from now, we encounter the dog owner and they're out walking in a field with a bunch of woods. The dog is off leash. The dog is wearing an electric collar. The owner has a transmitter. The dog's running around doing dog stuff. And you stop and ask the person, hey, I noticed your dog is 4 years old. I mean, have you always just walked the dog like this at liberty to run around in this field and, investigate trees and roots and sniff and all this kind of stuff? And they say, actually, no, this is completely different. The dog was 3.5 years old. I had to tie the dog to me with a 5-foot hunk of leather. I was miserable on walks. The dog never had any experience of freedom. And I was continually apprehensive about the dog breaking away from me and chasing the deer that live over in there in those woods. So we were kind of a mess. So I contacted a dog trainer. We spent, X amount of money. And now it's really normal for us to take a walk once a day. I spend about an hour out here with my dog every day. The dog runs in the woods, runs and plays. I choose to leave the electric collar on the dog. I have the transmitter. It's all electrified and so forth, because that's what my dog trainer told me to do. Don't give up the electric collar too soon just because your dog is trained. Leave it in place. Leave the contingencies in place. So I plan to keep running things like this for at least the next 6 months or a year. And we have this time together every day. And wow, my welfare is better. I now have the experience of dog ownership that I had in mind when I got this dog, right? And it looks to me like my dog's experience is much better than it was before. And if you ask them then, well, yeah, but was training ever like stressful and uncomfortable for you and for the dog? Like you making the decisions, the ethical decisions about how much pressure was desirable and ethical to put on the dog to achieve the training objective, and for your dog to learn about these contingencies and learn that the circumstances in its life had changed. Was that ever successful? Was that ever stressful? And the owner might say, yeah, actually it was pretty stressful. Well, then the question would come up, on balance, was it a justified thing to do? On balance, throughout the sweep of the dog's life, throughout the sweep of the owner's life, because the owner's welfare matters. The welfare of the deer that are just trying to carry out their lives in the woods, the other dogs that the owner might encounter on walks, everyone's welfare matters. The community matters too. So what I try to do is shift attention from a few moments in the dog's life that some people say are sufficient evidence that the dog's welfare is in danger, to the entire sweep of the dog's existence, the entire sweep of the owner's existence, and the community in which they live. That's the calculus for me. And if there is predictability and control, if the animal does have the freedom to run and engage in a whole bunch of species typical behaviors, etc., then we often are ethically justified in using pressure, we can call it, stressing the dog in order to achieve behavioral objectives, training objectives, in order to make life better for the dog, better for the owner, better for the community, etc.
It's amazing you say that, because I would argue the art there of, because that dog, when you were talking about that scenario, I have a dog right now in my program. Her name is Jelly. She's like this Whippet pit bull mix. She's a year old, and she came from a shelter, and she was returned twice. She's very low confidence, very flighty, and if she can't flight, she bites. So like with collars, if you were to put those on, she wouldn't bite to be mean. She was so uncertain, I believe is how I would diagnose her. Was her response was, I will bite people for them to get away. And this is a dog I could not have trained 2 years ago, right? And I think the art is knowing how much stress at what point to apply, where it's enough where the dog could still process how to get out of it with your help, but not put them into this spiral of kind of, I lose my mind, right? And basically the first goal was to teach Jelly, who's 1 year old, and they put her on Prozac around 8 months old, who had very low motivation, which made it more challenging. She didn't like food, right? And I imagine Prozac kind of suppresses appetite in general. She liked to play, but only when she was perfectly comfortable, which was never, right? And she would get severe separation anxiety to the first two people she met. So like, if you were to look at the early stages of training, even with just a long line and a slip lead, and getting her to come to me and helping her navigate what people would say is stress, or helping her jump up on a picnic table or walk through an obstacle course, right? If someone was watching, they might hear her, shriek and spin and try to bite, figuring out how to cope with that stress, not as a puppy, but now as a 1 year old kind of teenager. In many parts of the training, I would argue, would be viewed as ugly. But now that dog, and I would say I used the least amount of stress possible with that dog, because it would spiral her. Now, I mean, I see that owner all the time. That dog is as happy as we've ever seen it. It plays. We got it off Prozac. It has food drive. It goes on bike rides with the mom. It runs off the leash.
I find that completely believable. I've seen a ton of cases like that, and there is, we don't want it to be ugly, right? Like there's one way to look at the process of training a dog that is fearful or timid, etc., is that you may find it ethically justified to put some pressure on the dog in order to achieve training objectives. But also what I think many of us would say is that the dog needs to be developed so that the dog can handle the stress of daily life better. And one of the things that you can do with dog training is expose the dog to doses of what Michael Ellis calls proctored stress, meaning stress that is modulated correctly so that it's not too much for the dog, and that you prepare the dog to control it, and you give the dog sufficient information and skills that the dog is going to predict what is going to happen, right?
Can I give one example of that real quick?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Like the picnic table or the obstacle course. Before I even do that, it's a small dog. I wrap the leash around my around my wrist, and then put it on a 30-foot line. And I love running. Right behind my house is nature. So with that flighty dog, she's always trying to get away, right? So the first week of stress, and this is stress, people wouldn't realize it, is just her on 2 lines with slip leads. And I'm just going for a jog in nature. I mean, how fast can I run? I'm probably running 6 miles an hour, right? And then she's probably 20, 30 yards away. She might hit the end of the line and just see my back. There's no pressure on her. And she might just have to hit the end of that line and just start following me in that direction in a strut.
Yeah, and she might not look real happy while she's doing it. Right?
She doesn't. She doesn't even enjoy nature at that point, which is the crazy thing.
Your options are to leave her inside or spend the next 6 months trying to gradually lead her outside with the food that she doesn't really want, right? So you can there's a continuum all the way from doing something so kind of hasty and rash that almost all of us would agree that it's too much stress for the dog. Correct. And then on the other side of the continuum is proceeding in such tiny steps that the dog will be fucking dead before you make any measurable progress. Or to put it another way, the owner will have given up, right?
Which two owners did?
Yeah, when the owner hits $10,000, maybe they give up, right? Maybe they give up on the dog. So there's some place in the middle where the level of stress is something that the dog can handle, and also you're making enough progress with the dog so that the process is viable. In a reasonable period of time and a reasonable amount of money, you're going to change this family's existence for the better. And I can see a situation, I didn't know the dog exactly, but I can see a situation where you're scratching your head going, wow, I need to get this dog outside, and I need to get the dog following me, moving with me through space. And there's no way I can do it right now because this dog has such problems, right? So I'm going to give the dog a ton of distance from me by giving her a long line. And then I'm going to move away from her and oblige her to move with me until she discovers that it's a nice experience. Right. And parts of it are going to look a little bit ugly. But if I try anything else, it's going to be worse, right? So I can see that making complete, being an ethical thing to do, given certain circumstances, given an individual dog. And I would not be at all surprised to hear that after going through these procedures that looked kind of ugly, in the end, you wound up with a more vital and more outgoing and seemingly more confident, better adjusted dog. That wouldn't surprise me a bit. And what we want to try to do is keep the ugliness to a minimum. But what we have to understand is sometimes absolutely no ugliness, like no stress, no demands put on the dog that extend the dog at all, can be a non-viable way to go because the dog does not make fast enough progress.
Correct.
And the overall project will not be a success.
Well, and the magic of it, just to give you guys the progression, and then obviously the next thing you have to teach it is like when she hears her name and come to make an effort to come my direction instead of obviously what she wants to do is to go the other direction. Once we get that, I will have her mom meet us at a random point in that nature walk, still on that long leash. And I have an electric bike. And now I ask the mom to use the electric bike. And now the mom, who she loves, who she has separation anxiety from, wow, this nature walk leads to my mom. And then the mom starts going on the electric bike and the dogs start chasing mom. And now we provided a reinforcement event, a positive reinforcement event, I would argue, from, hey, all of that pressure, all of that like little learning that you didn't love, look, it led to this. And now there's a fun dog with mom that day. And that dog might be a little bit pushy and playful and get this dog to be a little excited. This is literally the progression of this dog. And now this dog is one of my favorite dogs I've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's really a rewarding case. I could not have trained this dog. I think this is a relatively challenging dog for my level of training. Obviously, Michael Ellis, Ivan, who've done this hundreds and hundreds of times. But it's a very rewarding case to see the dog from where it came.
Because you make a difference, right? Like because what we often, I have not read a piece of literature yet that, well, that's not true. I think I found a couple of references to in scientific papers to the plight of the owners, right? Like when people come to professional dog trainers, they are often, their welfare is really, really compromised because they love their dogs. They feel a duty to their dogs. They want to keep their dogs, but their dogs are making their lives super, super unpleasant and stressful. They're in danger of being evicted. They're having a horrible quarrel with their neighbors. They're afraid to take the dog outside. They have all kinds of problems, right? And so when you have a really positive effect on a case like this, and you sort of send people off over the horizon with the sense that the owners, the family is functioning and having a much better time with their dog, and then also the dog's welfare is vastly increased, and the odds that the dog is going to wind up in a shelter or wind up euthanized or wind up running away or getting run over or whatever have gone way down. That is super gratifying, and it's the kind of thing that'll keep you in the game for 25 years instead of burning out after 3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, this dog, lady got it as a birthday present and then came home, tried to put collars on, and it was biting her and her daughter. Yeah. And this lady owns a gym, and now the dog can, I wouldn't say it's best friends with everyone that comes to the gym. We're working more on getting like playing fetch. So some people, but like it could be in the gym perfectly fine, not run out the front door when it's stressed. And more important that I found is what I think is like kind of like when you feel stressed, come to me, come to mom. Look for us for guidance. We're never going to let you down. It's sort of like the overarching lesson, if I could put that into words.
And there's scientific work that I've read recently that points to those kind of interactions between infants and parents as being super, super important for infants to develop lifelong abilities to handle stress. And I don't know if equivalent work has been done with dogs, but you've essentially taken a dog that couldn't go many places in the world without being super stressed, or couldn't go many places in the world without causing a real scene and really stressing the owner, right? And now the dog is going to work and hanging out in the gym, maybe not necessarily being friends with everybody in the gym, but going more places in the world, developing more capabilities, more confidence, thicker skin, more resilience, right? You are developing the dog. And if you'd gone into that training program, my guess would be if you'd gone into that program with the dog, with the first thing in your mind, I have to protect this dog from stress. I can't let anything in my training program stress this dog. I doubt you would have made the progress you made.
It's not how I ever done it. Can I ask you a question though?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the magic here wasn't me. It was really the owner, if that makes sense. Like, I always ask my guests, I always ask them, like, are you a natural? I guess when it comes to dog training. And when I say natural, I mean, we could define that term. But this wasn't my first business. I actually never thought I'd be a dog trainer. You know, I built websites. I built apps. My dad had a family business. It was called Horn and Harder. I don't know if that means anything to you guys.
No.
It was like the Starbucks before Starbucks. So like, I had a sports card business. You know, I played college sports. Like I was on Wall Street. I never thought I'd be a dog trainer, but I got a dog at like kind of like this period in my life, maybe like right during COVID, and I just taught it how to be off leash. And I lived in an apartment complex, and neighbors started asking for help. And I didn't even know this was an industry, if I could be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and I decided instead of being a dog trainer, I bought a mobile grooming van. I was like, hey, I'm in South Florida. There's a lot of poodles and doodles here. Maybe I'll start like, you know, helping them get grooming. And what I realized was so many of these dogs on the grooming table bit groomers. It's the hardest job in the industry. Yeah. So I had to.
Or to put it another way, for many of the dogs, grooming was a very stressful experience.
It was. Right? And I had to turn. Yeah. So I quickly became the groomer or the groomer's helper. That these dogs who needed to be sedated previously, and the owner's like, I don't want to sedate my dog to get a haircut anymore. They would call me.
Groomed, right?
To get groomed. So in like a span of like an hour, I had to build a relationship with this dog. And what I started offering was free runs before the groom. So if you were to book with me, I'll take your dog. If it's like a nervous dog, I'll take it for a long run.
Great business idea.
But I never thought I'd be a dog trainer.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm at with my business. That I don't want to say it's a struggle. It's not, but like, I feel like a good amount of the result of the dog still falls on the owner.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like if the owner, if you don't have the owner's buy-in, if the owner does not become a student of their dog's behavior and of training, you will not have success. And a weird thing will happen sometimes, I'm sure you've encountered it, where people will be willing to turn loose of a lot of money but they're not willing to become any kind of student of their dog's behavior. And in those circumstances, it kind of doesn't matter how much money they throw at you. You're not going to be able to produce a success for them.
So I have one kind of overarching big theory, because I only do pet dog sports. I don't do sport dog training. Yeah. The owners that can't become conscious of how they give affection. So I find where I am is that there's just this overabundance of affection given from owner to dog, and they're not conscious of when and they give it. I sleep with my dogs. If they want to come in, take food from the table, they're a well-behaved dog. I don't care about any of that stuff. But if you consistently message me that you have problems with your dog, and you can't just for 5 minutes of a day just tell your dog that they don't need to be kind of up your ass, I find that small habit kind of manifests into bigger problems.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. So if you watch, like I've long argued that if you watch 5 minutes of video of somebody with their dog in a public place or on their own with their dog or whatever, and if you see that the majority of the interactions between the handler and the dog are initiated by the dog, so that you see that the owner is continually reactive, and the owner is very often petting the dog, responding to stuff the dog is doing, and so forth, and you don't see the converse where the owner is the initiator, that probably, if you guess that there's a stronger likelihood of behavior problems and training problems in the background, I'd say you're right. And I think probably the 2 weak points, and I never really thought about this before, which is surprising as much as many pet dogs I train for people. But one of the difficulties with owners is establishing timing and technique, sufficient timing and technique. Another one is kind of emotional regulation, like you're talking about. Like, hey, I know you want to touch your dog right now, but it's not the right time. It will serve our interests if you touch the dog at sometime in the future, not right now, right? And those are two places in which many owners are really challenged to learn what they need to learn.
So just bringing it back to Jelly, so she would get so attached to her mom, like even if she was crate trained and she heard her mom's voice barking, not even that big of a deal. But what I said was, when we let her out of the crate and we meet at that nature area, what I'm looking for at this, like a kind of higher progression of training, is if you could push her down and not let her jump on you for 5 minutes, 5 seconds, and you can find an opportunity to throw the ball at her and have her chase it. Get a tug toy and see if she just puts her teeth on it. And then use your affection to say, I want to build a relationship with you this way, versus, like you said, reactive owner. Jelly would come out of the crate, mom would come home, Jelly's jumping all over her, but it's not in this sense of like, I missed you. It's like in this sense of like, I am so anxious without you, that what we turned that energy coming out of the crate, jumping on mom saying, just pushing her down, into this dog plays as well as my pit bull buddy right here, has more drive than any. Now she plays tug, because we kind of took that, like we transmuted it, Napoleon Hill. We transmuted that energy from I need to be all over mom to I could bite and play with mom. And now just today we were playing really awesome tug with that dog who would never have played like that just a month ago.
Yeah, like if an anxious dog is venting, is expressing all of its energy in anxious behaviors, it takes up a bunch of the dog's bandwidth, and it's really difficult to get the dog to inject energy into play, into joy, all that kind of stuff. And one of the options is to begin to obstruct or prevent the expression of anxious energy towards you, and then change the contingency so that you give the dog the opportunity to express energy as part of a contingency for engaging in a desirable behavior, right? And so we can kind of talk about it in a metaphysical sense. And I think anybody who's trained a lot of companion dogs has seen, like, one of the things that I say about dog training is that well-done dog training has a really startling amount of power to change the way a dog lives in the world, right? To change the dog's personality, if you want to call it. But it doesn't happen during the 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever your training period is. That's not where all the effect is. Now, some of the effect can be pretty startling, and I've had more than one owner go, wow, I don't recognize my own dog, right? But that's not where the main part of the change takes place. What I tell them is that the big change is going to take place as a result, like in the 6 months after we cooperate together to train your dog, and the 6 months after that, your dog will change enormously as a function of you maintaining the dog in a trained state. And it can be magical. You can see results that you can't believe. And it's not done by the dog trainer. The dog trainer facilitates it, makes it possible. But if the owner can maintain the dog in a trained state for a number of months, and not a perfectly trained state,
Sure.
Maybe not in as well-trained a state as they got the dog back from the dog trainer in, but just in a trained state. If the owner can maintain the dog in a trained state for a number of months, it will produce sometimes magical effects.
Dr. Hilliard, can you share with me the principles of that might cover all the dogs? I know it's so specific, like what a trained state is for one dog can't be the same. But like, what are some of your fundamental principles of what you would say to a companion dog owner?
In terms of how I define a trained state?
Yes.
Things like that the dog can demonstrate, the dog handler dyad can demonstrate impulse control, meaning the dog wants to do something, and the two of them work it out so the dog either doesn't do it or doesn't do it right now. Waits until a cue that authorizes it to do whatever it wants to do. Also, that the dog will follow and come to the owner, and that certain spaces can be reserved for the owner only, not the dog. And what I mean by that is I don't have a strong value about dogs being on beds, right? Like my dogs get on the bed. But the point is, when I tell them, and they even get on the bed before they're told to get on the bed, right? That's just kind of the way it works around here. But if I say, get off of the bed, they get off of the bed. If I say, don't come in the room right now, they don't come in the room right now. And so if your dog refrains from action until you tell the dog it can, if your dog follows you without a ton of input from you, if your dog comes when you call it, and you can either keep the dog in one place for a period of time with a command or verbal encouragement of some kind, or have the dog leave a place that you want the dog to leave with a command or encouragement, or not allow the dog to enter a space unless you give a commute. That's enough of a trained state right there. And things can be a little wild and woolly, but if you have those things, that is a big change for a lot of dogs that are brought to dog trainers. Those are big objectives, and if they are achieved, that can make a huge difference in a dog.
I mean, listening to you say that, I don't want to say it's easy because that would be unfair, but it's so simple. Where my mind went was, I can't believe we even argue between different tribes of force-free and not, because all of that stuff is just like, what are we even arguing about? There it is right there.
I think there are some people that might listen to my like in a funny kind of way. You're asking me questions that are making me think, right? Like I've never had anybody ask me before, what do you mean by a trained state? So I had to think about it and go, well, what are the essentials of a trained state, right? And I think there are some folks from the force-free community that might take strong exception to a couple of things that I say.
I had a young kid here. He came with a friend of his, like I think she's his aunt, And like people just like to come hang out with dogs, and there she might be getting a dog. She brought her nephew, and kids ask such funny questions and sarcasm. Most kids don't get sarcasm. So, and I'm pretty sarcastic at times, but he was like asking all these questions.
Yeah. Up until a certain point, and then they start to, start using it a lot. Yeah.
But one of his great questions, like, would you rather have a dog that fetches perfectly or has impulse control? And I was like, impulse control. Like that was the first thing you mentioned. And I was like, impulse control.
How old was this kid?
9 years old. He was great with the dogs yesterday. And there was a few dogs, they were all fetching. And then what I asked him to do was to put they were all running after a ball. And then he put them individually using a leash onto place beds and then let one fetch. Then he took another one off the place bed and put another on it. And I said, if a dog can have impulse control and wants the ball, but it will be willing to lay here and do that with a new person that it just met, you can do just about anything with that dog in terms of the pet owner relationship, right?
Yeah.
So that was
put it another way, if when the dog is presented to you, if there are big behavior problems, it is a highly likelihood that you can make a few tests for impulse control and not see it. And if you, through your manipulations, can install impulse control in this handler dog dyad such that the dog, abstains from action until the dog is told that it can engage in action, you will probably have made a big difference. Leaving out the sit and the down and the heeling and all that other kind of stuff. If you simply through some operations install the ability for the handler dog dyad to get the dog to abstain from action until authorized or abstain from action until later, you've probably made things a lot better.
And I find that if the owner can do that, teaching the heel, sit, down, stays, whatever becomes easy because they understand the concept of you're free, you have to do something until you hear otherwise. If they understand that concept, teaching dogs lay down on their own, they sit down on their own, they actually heel on their own. Heel is much more complex. It's it's a little more challenging of an activity. But if they can do that, if the owner can teach that or the owner can maintain that, it shouldn't be an issue. Can I ask you something? The canology seminars.
Yeah.
For those that, guys, anywhere you're listening to this around the world, you can tune into those virtually. And I highly recommend you do. I don't know if you have the one with Haran coming up or...
No, we did that about when was that event? That event was in December. So Darshan and I taught a seminar in Los Angeles, and we have another seminar. This is a big one. What we call an event we call a symposium in Santa Rosa, California, on the 14th to the 18th of April.
Okay.
The instructors are myself. Darshan will be there, also Forrest Mickey and Michael Ellis. And so what I do is I discuss dog behavior and learning and what's known about animal behavior and learning from scientific laboratories. And we discuss various theories that have application to dog training. And then what Michael and Forrest and Darshan will do is translate that into practice. And then also Michael especially is a very deep and penetrating thinker about dog training. And he has a pretty amazing ability to say some of the sometimes impenetrable things that I say about dog training and science into very comprehensible sound bites. So that event is 14 to 18 April. And yes, there is a virtual option. It's the fourth of this series of events that we refer to as Kynology Symposia. And if any of your viewers want to hear more about it or learn more about it, go to kynology.org. And that's spelled KYNOLOGY.org. Kynology.org, and they can learn about the Kynology project and see what kinds of events we have upcoming.
And you did one with Daisy Peel. So if you guys don't know Daisy, she's amazing, 10+ time champion with agility. How did these become a thing? Why did you want to? What made you want to scratch this itch?
A couple of things. One of them is that I'd like to get better at dog training myself. And one way to do that is to hang out around really, really good dog trainers that are better than I am. And this is an excuse for me to do that, to get to hang around people like Michael and Forrest and Daisy. And I did a seminar with Jerry Bradshaw recently. So it's a way for me to bring an area that I'm strong at, which is integrating behavioral science with dog training together with practitioners and dog training theorists who have something important to say and are very effective. And so what we like to do is get together in teams of collaborators and kind of let the magic happen. Because when we begin to compare perspectives over dog work, it gets super, super interesting.
One of the things you guys talked about on the panel with Ivan was, the force-free community always talks about how, if you are Dr. Stewart Hilliard, Dr. Michael Ellis, yes, you can do punishment, but for the, novice dog trainer, they're going to mess up punishment, right? They always kind of, what I had a realization of, and this is almost embarrassing to say, but I think this is fair to say, like, I need to learn how to use positive reinforcement better, because I've always had and I described it, a real good understanding of negative reinforcement to teach things, right? Say what you're asking for, just use a little bit of pressure, just the right amount. Like I've always had that touch, and then free, and we're going to run, we're going to do things in nature, we're going to play. But I want to get around more sport dog trainers to really understand, because I don't know why this isn't discussed more, is how good sport dog trainers are, or the good sport dog trainers are, at using positive reinforcement to teach behavior and to create motivation.
Yeah.
Is that
fair
to say?
Yeah, very fair to say. I think at least so I've spent the majority of my career in working dogs, practical working dogs, meaning animals that are trained to carry out real life jobs.
Yeah.
And it is, you would think that military and police, because they rely on their dogs in very, very important circumstances, you would think that they engage in a whole bunch of innovation and cutting edge kind of work. And in fact, that's not the case. Police and military tend to be very conservative and stick with what has worked in the past, and essentially pursue known strategies to get the job done. The people who innovate, the people who work at the forefront, at the cutting edge of dog training, are amateurs, right? They are sports people who are training dogs for sports and hobbies, who have the imagination and also the risk tolerance to try new stuff. So most of the breakthroughs that I'm aware of in practical work dog training did not originate in practical work dog training. They were taught to practical work dog trainers by sports people who came up with new methods and new ideas that then penetrated every part of dog training. And one of the best examples of that is the use of what I'll call operant technique, which is what you referred to a moment ago, which is the technique and the method and the theory of training dogs with positive reinforcement. That essentially came to dog training through exotic animal training, and it first penetrated in sport, right? So the first people who began to use operant technique in a really concerted, precise way were obedience trainers, and then competitive obedience trainers. And then gradually it began to penetrate other kinds of work until the working dog competitors, like Schutzhund competitors, ring sport competitors, and so forth, began to use aspects of operant technique with their dogs. And then finally, in about the last decade, these techniques have begun to penetrate military working dog training and police working dog training, right? And so I think it's very fair to say that that we stand on the shoulders of amateur dog trainers, people who are doing it for love and for fun, but doing it deadly seriously. And they're the ones that evolve the field. They're the ones who make the majority of the major breakthroughs that the rest of us adopt and modify for our purposes.
I'd love to probably ask Michael Ellis this as well, but I think you're going to have a great take on this. Is share with me your thoughts of when food is the right tool to use, when toys are the
almost always.
When toys are well, you ask a whole group of newly certified trainers, there's a whole movement, and they're respected. They're good trainers. I'm not going to sit here and bash on them, but they're mostly toy and play based. So when would you use food? When would you use toys? And when would you use a clicker as a marker versus verbal markers?
I use food a great deal. I really value, even in dogs destined for work, and what I mean, when I say work, I'm using that word in a kind of a limited sense for dogs that are dual purpose military dogs or dual purpose police dogs, meaning that they find stuff like explosives or drugs. They find people through tracking or building search or whatever. And also they are prepared to engage people in a military sense, meaning bite them, right? Like pursue them, fight them, bite them, all that kind of stuff. So I tend to, obviously, there are other kinds of dogs in the world that do enormously important work, like search and rescue dogs, service dogs, herding dogs. There's all kinds of dogs that do really important work that don't necessarily come under this heading of work, right? But when I talk about working dogs, I'm talking about the sport and practical working dogs that I spent my life amongst. And with these dogs, they are bred with super, super strong motivations to engage with what are called toys, what I would call prey objects, stuff that they can bite and engulf, possess, pursue, all that kind of stuff. These are our rewards. But also, it is super convenient when they have very, very good play drive. Very, very good food drive, because that gives you a laboratory in which you can teach impulse control at a lower level of strength of the impulse. You can also conduct many, many, many quick and efficient training trials with a handful of food, when it takes much more effort on your part and the dog's part to do a toy motivated, sit or heel or whatever. So I think of food as something that I will use with almost any dog that has enough motivation to take the food from me. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be a part of every exercise forever. With many exercises, we're going to transition to the use of a Kong or a toy or some kind of bite or prey object. But in the building of that exercise and in the building of the dog's understandings of work, understandings of impulse control, especially understandings of fluency, which means relaxed but vigorous movement, food is super useful.
Relaxed but vigorous. Those feel like they feel like they're like opposed to each other, right? Like, how would you explain that?
So the word I use is fluency, and obviously we more often hear that word associated with speech, but I think the analogy, the metaphor is a really good one, because I have a smattering of a couple of other languages. I lose my facility with those other languages when I'm nervous and I get tied up. When I am the right degree of activated and interested in speaking to somebody, but not anxious, I become more fluent. There is such a thing as fluent movement, meaning there's a big difference between a dog who, when it's asked to lie down in order to get a reward held above its head, there's a big difference between a dog who lies down quickly by relaxing all the muscle groups that have to be relaxed in order for the dog to lie down, and putting other muscle groups into motion that help the dog to lie down, so that you hear the dog go to the ground. There's a big difference between that and a dog who is tied up by his or her desire for the reward held over its head and has to sort of fight itself to lie down. And this conflict between the desire to do what is asked for and the desire to depart into some other behavior that conflicts with the commanded skill, that conflict can be based on fear. It can be based on apprehension. It can be based just on a ton of motivation. The dog can have a lot of trouble lying down because it really wants the food in your hand, or it really wants the rubber ball in your hand, or whatever, right? And so fluency is the expression that we use for a dog who not only understands what we want it to do in response to a particular discriminative cue or command, but also the dog is capable of doing it quickly and crisply. And in order to do almost any worthwhile skill, the dog has to relax a bunch of muscle groups while it engages others. And when we see fluency lost is when the ability to relax muscle groups in order to carry out a behavior is lost or is not present. And the dog becomes tense and slow and reluctant. And if you put pressure on top of tenseness and slowness and reluctance, you will only get more tenseness and slowness and reluctance.
Well said. Okay, let me take some variables away. Can any dog get fluency with the perfect trainer and no any duration of time?
I mean, people who are really good can produce extraordinary results, right? So dogs that I cannot make fluent in their responses to commands, meaning I can have relaxed or I can have fast, but I can't have fast and relaxed. I can't produce that. Somebody like Michael Ellis can, right? And particularly if you give him a lot of time.
Right.
To do it, like kind of unlimited time budget to get the job done. So knowledge and talent and time make a huge difference. Something that Bob Bailey says. You acquainted with who Bob Bailey is?
Can you share a little more about him?
Yeah. So Bob Bailey is what I call the eminence grise of the operant dog training community. So that's like the grand old man, the gray eminence, the grand gray eminence of operant dog training, because he was an associate of Keller and Marilyn Breland. He later went on, after Keller unfortunately died at a relatively early age, he went on to marry Marion Breland. I think I mispronounced her name a moment ago. Her name was Marion. To marry Marianne Breland. And he is sort of one of the heirs of Skinnerian technique applied to training of animals of all kinds. He's a very, very wise and experienced person. And one of the things that he says is that given enough time and enough persistence, anybody can train any animal to do anything. I think there are limits to that. But essentially, he is pointing at something that's fundamentally a truth, which is that if you do not acknowledge that it's impossible and you try sincerely with all your heart and humbly for a long time, you can produce amazing results with very unlikely dogs, right? And sometimes it's not just your belief and your sincerity and your humility, it's your raw talent and how much you've studied and how much you've learned. And that will really make a difference. Time, talent, commitment can get a lot done with a very unlikely dog.
Can I share something that I'm like, if you were to ask me right now, Andrew?
I like that little person behind you. Who's that?
Dude, his name's Ike.
Ike's cool.
He's a Chiweenie.
Oh, I like him. I want him to show more of himself. But go ahead.
I wish I would have had him. You guys, I wish I would have had a camera for his first pack walk. I've never heard a dog scream so loud when he saw other dogs. And this was a 3-month-old puppy.
Like reactivity kind of screaming, you mean?
Well, he's on a long line. So
right.
yeah,
But
like true fear, I would say.
Okay. So yeah.
He hid in a bush.
Okay. Poor guy.
Right, like the true fear, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
I've had hundreds of dogs come here just like come for a walk in nature. I don't even know if that's training anymore. But like I just have my mentor pack, and then I'll introduce one new dog on a long line.
Yeah.
Right, like calm dogs that like if you're screaming, that dog's just gonna go away. It's not gonna push you.
Right.
And he was screaming bloody murder, and now he's my most playful dog.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure if that's a good thing because now a lot of his reinforcement is from dogs. So like you learn.
And your point might be some of the stages along the way were a little bit ugly, right? So if you looked at a couple minutes of the dog's existence when he was first starting to learn to handle a world in the company of other dogs, might have looked kind of bad, right? And I'm not saying that that good training of necessity involves ugly moments, but it is a fact that if you just take a 2-minute look at a training program for a whole bunch of dogs, you might go, ooh, that was a little ugly. But then later, if you saw the dog's existence, you might go, oh, okay. I don't know if that was exactly the best thing that could have been done with a dog, but the dog's life and welfare are demonstrably a ton better right now than they were. So some shit got done, some shit got done that was useful.
So I think I have a way that I think can improve the industry. And it comes down to the word time, right? You said time a few times there, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of really good, talented trainers, right? We saw like the reality of life is we have to pay bills, right? Trainers have a business, they have to pay bills, they have to pay. So I did this too. Like you do 2 and 3 week board and trains where the dog's with you overnight.
Yeah.
And I've completely switched my model. So I no longer do overnight board and trains really for any dog other than like the real dogs that have to live with me. I do a school, meaning the dogs get dropped off at 8 a.m. and picked up at 4 p.m. And what has happened is now we're on the dog schedule instead of the dog being on our schedule, right? Because you're in a 2-week board and train, you have to get results for the client, but the dog doesn't know it's there for 2 weeks. It has no clue. So now you're here adding pressure because it's day number 9 and you still haven't even gotten that dog to down, but that dog can't down because it's not comfortable with you.
Yeah, it's real hard to do a 2-week, board and train on a dog and have anything at the end of the 2 weeks that you can show the owner and represent as progress unless you put pressure in. And sometimes for many dogs, the level of pressure you put in is wildly inappropriate. Not good for the dog, not good. Yeah. So
versus, hey, it's a school. You could bring your dog here once a week for 6 months. And I've actually found that the results in that scenario where the client's kind of spending the same money, I have that 6 months where they come once a week, twice a week. You build a relationship. You don't have to rush. The dog gets comfortable with you. The dog lays down on their own. You mark and reward that. I found the results just that way, right? So the trainer doesn't train. They just change how they're running their business. Takes a lot of pressure off the trainer, a tremendous of pressure off the dog. And most dogs aren't coming for these severe behavioral modification cases where they have to live with you. Most of them are like general obedience with like this, like a tiny bit of reactivity. I urge young trainers to start doing day school. I think it will reduce their stress and I think they'll get better results.
I think you've got something there. Like if you can prolong the period of time, they're called dispersed trials, right? So if you have an hour to work with a dog and you disperse and you invest that hour in the dog over one day versus if you have an hour to work with the dog and you invest in the dog over 10 days, you will get a better result over 10 days. So if you can, as a result of any manipulations, prolong the period of time during which you work with the dog, invest in the dog, teach the dog, if you can prolong that period of time and set up the economics and the buy-in from the owners so that they tolerate that period of time, because you might be competing against people who are saying, hey, I'll get it done in 2 weeks, right? And I'll get it done for $800. then those people can be difficult to compete with, not in terms of your result, but just getting the people in the door, right? So I think if you have a way, this school idea where the dogs essentially come by for almost like what do they call them? When people drop their dogs off.
Day training, some people call it. Some people call it happy, like some people call it day camp.
Yeah, like day camp. If you can work out the economics and develop an industry-wide model where more people approach dog training as a longer-term project, and they can work the economics and they can get the owners to buy into it, I think that would be a very constructive change across the industry. I think that the more people we can get to quit offering 2-week courses, the better. The better for dogs, the better for the industry, the better for owners, the better for everybody.
Because you get like a puppy and you send them to overnight for 2 weeks. You get that puppy into the wrong person's hand, you could mess that puppy up for life. And it's just misincentives, right? So the trainer wants to get results, but it's a puppy. It's 3 months old. It can't mentally do that.
And I think that's an extreme case. I don't think a lot of people would take puppies in for 2 weeks. I could be wrong. Maybe they would. But in
South Florida, it's incredibly, incredibly popular to send puppies beneath the age of 8-9 months to overnight board and trains.
And that wouldn't, I mean, if the goals are limited, I can see a place for that. But if the goals are to have the dog really significantly advanced in training at a young age in 2 weeks, I think that could lead to some real bad incentives for dog trainers.
What can you do? So like I have 2 pit bull puppies. Pit bull puppies are like, I enjoy them, but for owners, they're really difficult. What can be like a minimal, like what would be the expectations? You get a pit bull, let's even say 3 weeks. You get a pit bull puppy, loves to bite, like has drive. What would you think that a puppy should learn for the first 5-6 months of its life?
I would be looking for things like recall to the owner, going to and staying on a pause table, waiting at doors and stuff like that, following the owner following the owner through space, being neutral about intense stimuli found encountered out in the environment, but all in a puppy kind of way, like with the assistance of food and lots of encouragement, not commands that the dog lawfully follows or is held accountable, but just navigating the puppy through the world so that the puppy learns to allow itself to be influenced in its responses to all kinds of things by the owner, right?
But without duration, is that fair to say? Like you can't hold this puppy accountable to laying on a place bed that's 3-4 months old.
You can get a couple minutes. I mean, I don't normally push for it in a young dog, but if you make it a goal of training, you can get a couple minutes without abuse and whatever. But normally, you have other objectives. Like I would be more interested in getting the puppy to move in response to commands than getting the puppy to not move in response to commands. It's real easy to get a dog to not move in response to a command. The commands about approach me, go with me, those commands are much more important, and they're easier to mess up, right? So if you budget me a bunch of time for training, I'm not going to devote it to getting a 3-minute pause table stay out of a 4-month-old. I can do it, but I would rather just get a little 25-second stay on a pause table and then budget my energy and time and the puppy's energy and time and the puppy's motivation to other more important stuff.
Pulling on the leash. What do you think about that one? For a 5-month-old golden retriever.
It depends on the state at which the dog comes to me, right? So if the puppy, nobody's made any concerted use of food to teach the dog to walk well, orient towards the handler, and so forth. So I might, if you bring me a golden retriever puppy that's 5 months of age and pulls on the leash like a little ox, then I might say, all right, we're going to kind of leave that alone for the time being and teach the dog all kinds of other things and come back to it. On the other hand, if the dog has a pretty good history of walking attentively at the owner's side under the influence of positive reinforcement in the form of food, and also the dog has learned to break off and be distracted out of many misbehaviors with the use of commands and food, then I can see working on good leash manners pretty concertedly in a 5-month-old. It just depends on the state in which the dog comes to me.
So I have two last questions. Where do you put play? Like, how important to you is playing with that puppy as a form of training?
Super important. Like, one of the things that you want to have in training any dog for any kind of system is you want as many different reinforcement systems as possible, right? So if you can have the dog working for food, working for 3 or 4 different objects to play with, working for social interaction and praise, and then working for social play with you, that's much better than having the dog just working for food or just working for a toy. You want as many different reinforcement systems producing different levels of activation, different levels of impulse control demands. You want as many different ones as possible for different purposes to work with your dog in different motivational states, different emotional states as possible.
What led you to get into dog training?
When I was a kid, I was crazy for animals. So what I thought I was going to do when I grew up, and I had this conviction from the time I was like 5 years old until I was maybe 21 or 22, thought I was going to be a veterinarian. And then in my early 20s, through some kind of accidents, I talked my mother into buying a German Shepherd puppy so that I could rear it and train it. Through a number of different accidents, I got involved in dog training and eventually decided that I was too dumb for organic chemistry and calculus that were going to be necessary if I was going to get into veterinary school. And then also I began to decide I was more interested in behavior than I was in physiology and medicine. And looking back on it, I think that was actually the best decision for me. I think I've enjoyed a much, for me, more congenial and rich career working with dogs' behavior than being a veterinarian who concerned themselves with physiology and medicine.
What do you think the vet industry does well, and where do you see that they can improve?
Wow. I hesitate to criticize or critique the veterinary profession because I'm not qualified, I've never practiced, etc. I do think that your average vet could profit by more education in behavior and training. And I think there is a push, an overall impetus in the veterinary profession to try to get practitioners more exposure to behavioral education. But I think it tends to be rather narrow focus, so that in general, the veterinary behavioral medication education is locked into, as a rule, operant technique and positive reinforcement centric techniques. Positive reinforcement centric is a kind of a difficult phrase because working dog trainers are real positive reinforcement centric because they need powerful behaviors from the dogs, powerful and precise behaviors from their dogs. And most of us acknowledge that the easiest way to get that is with positive reinforcement, right? But positive reinforcement is not the only thing they use. Very many very proficient and successful working dog trainers use the procedures in all 4 quadrants of the contingency square. So their positive reinforcement is all eccentric as all get out, but they also will use negative reinforcement and positive punishment in a targeted and a prepared way, right? And those 2 squares, those 2 quadrants in the contingency square, I don't think many veterinarians get any education about that stuff at all. And so I think that more behavioral education for your average practitioner, your average veterinary practitioner, and maybe more exposure to broad-based dog training.
Can I tell you my 3, and you'll
sure. Go ahead.
Early spay and neuter, kibble, and the science diet for dogs. And then these are just
what's the second one?
Kibble and the science diet, the foods, the Purina foods that they have. A lot, not every vet, guys, you know what I mean, but like a lot of them have those, the science diet or Purina in like the main lobby.
Yeah, they're sort of prescription diets.
Right.
And stuff,
Early spay and neuter. And then I've gotten a lot of these. I was surprised by this, was tracheal damage with collars around the neck. So they recommend harnesses.
So you're saying that you take some issue with they should spay and neuter dogs earlier, or they should not?
They need to tell people when they spay and neuter dogs early, they're going to lead to injuries. These are really important hormones that dogs need. We know this. You can't do this to dogs at a young age. You have to be thoughtful so they don't reproduce. But at the same time, these are very important organs that these dogs need to develop. And if you want to get your dog neutered, let your dog fully develop. Wait till 1, I would say 2, maybe 3 years old. That's 1.
And I don't know. I haven't studied this stuff, and I am not a vet, so I do not presume to tell veterinarians how they should do this. But I believe there is more emphasis in the field about letting, especially female dogs, grow closer to maturity before they are spayed. I think that is something going on. Your second one was prescription diets. What was your position there?
We can't expect healthy dogs, well-behaved dogs, if we feed them junk food. If we feed them dog food that has on the back, it's just chemical after chemical, and then it says like chicken meal. Like, we can't do that. We got to be better. Don't buy your dogs toys. At least feed them good food.
So are you saying that more people should feed the high-quality foods that veterinarians offer in their offices?
No.
Or are you saying... No.
I think veterinarians need to say, hey, if you can't afford raw and you can't afford healthy kibble, here's how you can make healthy food at home for your dog, which is infinitely better than the science diet.
Yeah, I don't have a strong position on that. I know there are, I decided many years ago that I didn't have room in my head for a ton of knowledge about dog nutrition. So I just kind of got good advice about what kind of food to feed, and then paid attention to how my dogs did on that food.
What was the advice?
Mostly about the kinds of food to stay away from for various reasons. And a couple of times, and also how to tell kind of if the food you're feeding is working for your dog, right? And to be flexible, to understand that there may be one quality food that your dog may not do well on, and he could do better on a different one, right? And so to search for the kind of food amongst the range of high quality foods that your dog will do well on. I've never fed natural, I've never fed raw, but then I don't cook for myself, right? So I'm unlikely to cook for.
Are you an Uber Eats guy, Dr. Hilliard?
I tend to eat easy, like whatever is easy. And these days I'm paying more attention to being careful about what I eat. So it tends to be the right kind of vegetables and, plant-based foods, because it's easy. And I'm trying to eat less meat for both health and ethical reasons.
Okay.
And then your last one was you were taking issue with veterinary advice to be super, super careful of a dog's neck, and therefore all dogs should wear harnesses, or most dogs should wear harnesses.
Correct. Where the underlying lesson there should be, hey, you need to teach your dog leash pressure, and this is how you do it, which is like a fundamental principle. Like, it's like,
yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I think harnesses are tools of the devil, right? And they lead to all kinds of bad things. And it, certainly harnesses are appropriate in order to take care of dogs' necks in all kinds of circumstances. But I think as a broad-based, the default thing that all dogs should go around in is harnesses, I don't think so.
Right. And you could put your dog in anything if your dog is trained. But to say, hey, this puppy should be in a harness because this trainer you're going to bring him to is going to give him tracheal damage. If you guys have ever seen a dog with tracheal damage, put it in the comments, because I've had tons of dogs come through here. I've never experienced that, so I don't know where that lie has come from.
I've seen it.
In working dogs, is that fair?
Yeah, I've seen them in working dogs.
Working dogs, right? Through too harsh of a correction, is that accurate?
Yeah, more than one. Than one. So as a rule, what I would say is that dogs' necks are very robust and not easy to injure, right? So it takes flagrant abuse of chain collars and prolonged abuse of chain collars, in my experience, normally to cause injury. But injury can sure be caused. And there are certain circumstances, like for instance, when we perform training with working dogs, when the dogs are supposed to get very excited and go forward, I'm a very strong advocate of use of harness at that time. And most people are. Like most of the time, years ago, 25 years ago, we used harnesses for tracking, and that was the only time we used harnesses. And the rest of the time, the dogs had wide leather collars that they pulled against very, very, very hard. And I don't do that anymore. And a lot of people I know don't do that anymore. If we want the dog to go forward and pull super, super hard, we put them in a harness. And that's not just care of the dog's trachea and the dog's neck, but very often we want the dog to be able to breathe freely and or bark freely while it is pulling. In order to do that, harness is best. So, I'm definitely about taking care of the dog's neck, but I don't think that taking care of a population of millions of pet dogs involves recommending harnesses for all of them at all times, right?
So I'll wrap up with this last question, because I keep mine 90 minutes.
Dude, I appreciate it, because I've done some interviews with people who at 2 hours and 15 minutes, I don't want to say, I think people are sick of us now. I don't want to say that, but they don't say it. So
the mental gas tank is on empty for everyone other than Ivan Balabanov, apparently. I don't know how he does 4 hours. I'll ask him. So what bothers you or frustrates you about today's current training landscape? And then what has improved since you began training?
I'm frustrated, I think, by one of the things that you mentioned was the drift towards a situation in which dog trainers are under a lot of pressure to offer 2-week courses in order to make it financially. I don't think 2-week courses are constructive unless the behavioral, the training goals are very limited, right? To what you can get done in 2 weeks usefully and without shutting the dog down with a ton of pressure, right? So I think this kind of economic paradigm where 2-week courses are common to quote unquote fully train your dog to make a real difference in your dog's behavior. That's something that I criticize rather strongly, because I don't think it's practical for most of us of normal gifts with normal dogs to get a ton of dog training done in 2 weeks, right? And then another one is a situation in which a relatively small number of very, very vocal individuals attempt to impose the standard on the entire dog training fancy and industry the idea that taking care of a dog's welfare is protecting the dog from all stress. I think that is a dead end. I don't think that end leads to progress. So those, if I have two gripes, those are my two gripes.
I appreciate you. So April 14th through 18th is the...
April 14th through 18th is our next event taking place in Santa Rosa. We still have some slots for in-person attendance. Also, of course, we have unlimited slots for virtual attendance. Go to kynology.org, kynology.org, to learn more about it and to register. After that, we've got a gig in Philadelphia. We're going to go back late in the year for a really big event in Santa Rosa again that I haven't sort of gone public about yet. And there'll be other events popping up on the calendar. If folks go to the website and they open accounts as community members, which is free, then you will get emails from us announcing all kinds of things. We'll have webinars, we'll have online courses, we'll have these in-person seminars that we're carrying on right now, all kinds of education. So I encourage people to go to the website and check it out. And most of all, if you want a dose of science and really good dog training from Michael and Forrest and Darshan, then go to the website, find out more about Kynology 4 taking place in April, and register for that sucker.
What's bringing you to Philadelphia?
There's a lady there named Lee Siegfried, who has a company called Op Barks, a successful companion dog training company called Op Barks. And Forrest, and
say that again?
It's Opportunity Barks. So Op Barks is the short for it, but it's Opportunity Barks. And Lee's a kind of an amazing person and a very vital and amusing and bright woman who runs this business outside of Philadelphia. And she had Forrest, Mickey, and I there for an event last year, which is where I met Daisy Peel, which led to us doing a Kynology event with Daisy Peel. And Lee runs such a wonderful event. Like her sort of hospitality skills are unparalleled. So we're having a small event that should be very educational and very fun at Lee's in, I think, very early June is what we set it for.
That's awesome. I'm from Philadelphia.
Are you from Philly?
I went to Drexel, Philly guy. So I'm now in South Florida. But guys, I told you this would be educational, entertaining. I told you guys to buckle up. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's been a long time coming, but more important than anything else, Dr. Hilliard, I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's a good interview. Thank you for your time. It's a privilege for me. And I hope you guys out there and you viewers enjoyed it as well.